In the last video we spoke about Star Ruby, and it's been split into two videos, so if you didn't watch the first one I'll link that above. So in this video we're going to continue with that discussion and also go into the singing of Eopan, which is quite significant and quite powerful. There is a lot of symbolism held in just the singing of Eopan. It's not just a way of making a pretty sound. So let's get into that. Okay, and then the next step in the ritual is the invocation of the intelligences or the guardians. Those being Yunges or Jonges, Teletachai, Chunoches or Syneches, and Daimonos. There's lots of Greek words here, so just excuse me while I read off my cheat sheet. So the entire passage, which I'm not going to repeat again, it was in the ritual that I read before. If you get my book, The Black Crow, then it's in there. There's also the Greek version in the book. So yes, I'm not even going to try and pronounce those words. So that translates to: before me, Junges; behind me, Teletachai; on my right hand, Synoches; on my left hand, Daimonos; about me flames the pentagram, and in the column stands the six-rayed star. So it's basically the same as the Spanish ritual of the pentagram, except that instead of calling the archangels, you're calling the intelligences or the guardians in Greek, and the whole thing is in Greek, but I mean it's exactly the same otherwise. Now in my book I go through a lot of different explanations of what the Yungas are, and there's some varying possibilities of what they are, where they come from, but there is one overlying aspect, and that is of the wheel. There's talk of the swastika as well, and if you're not familiar with the swastika from pre-Nazi times, the swastika is actually the sun wheel. So if this is the first time you're hearing about this, just do some research on it. The Nazi swastika was actually the reverse of the ancient symbol of the sun wheel. It goes back long before then, and so yeah, the Yungas. If we have a look at all of the different representations and all of the different explanations, then the Yungas are we can basically say that the Yungas are forces of chaotic or swirling wheel-like nature that transmit information between man and the Godhead. So in many cases they act as the messenger, much like we would consider angels nowadays, sort of messengers between God and man, or humans, practitioners, worshippers, etc. But the one aspect we need to take from this is the aspect of motion, of the wheel in motion, and this will become clear in a second. So next is the Teletachai. Now, when you're in the circle, you're facing east, and the Teletachai are behind you. Therefore, they're hidden from your view. And the Teletachai, they're sort of responsible for initiation. We're going to get into initiation in a later video. Often when we speak about initiation, people immediately think of being in a group where a new member gets initiated into the group. And that's not necessarily initiation. Initiation is more or less like a destruction and rebirth of the self. And initiations happen a lot throughout your magical practice, your magical career. They happen over and over and over again. So as I say, we'll get more into initiations in a later video. But in this aspect, as I say, the teletarche are responsible for initiation. So what you've got is the youngest, which are motion, bringing in messages and creating that swirling motion of energy, which then follows into initiation, which is the destruction and rebirth of the self. And also, if you think about it, the teletarche being behind you in the West, that's where, if you go into other traditions, that's where the watery divide is, the river Styx. It's the position of old age. So you can actually relate that back to the whole process of death and rebirth, flowing through the circle, the cycle that it takes. So you start in the East with birth, and you go into the day position, which then becomes middle age. You go to the West, which is old age, and then you go to the night position, which is then ancestry. You move into death, and then you move back into birth. So there's a whole death and rebirth that happens within the cycle of the circle, and it's very, very much an aspect with the motion of the youngest, and then the teletarche bringing in the initiation. But then we go on to the syneches. Now, the syneches aren't actually derived from any Greek word itself, but these are, we can understand the syneches as a binding or holding aspect. So they kind of bind things together. So when we look at the whole process, we have the youngest, the teletarche, and then the syneches. And there you have the motion, the wheel turning, which then becomes the initiation. And then from the initiation, we have the binding and holding. So there's a whole process that happens here. But then we get to the daimonos, and I've spoken about the word daemon in a previous video. So I'm not going to go lengthy into an explanation. I'll link that video above. But the daemon is the Latin and Greek word for what we now know in modern English as demon, and that obviously, being in modern English, has some negative connotations. But if we look back to the original word of daemon, then it actually relates to what I prefer to call a divine intelligence. In many cases, and I'd suggest in this case, what we're talking about is actually a spirit which is higher than ourselves. So it would be possibly the higher self, but more likely the holy guardian angel. It's that divine intelligence which aids us in life, which brings us knowledge, which brings us closer to the Godhead. So the word daemon, the original word daemon itself, as I say, suggests divine intelligence. It's usually translated as something like demigod or intelligent spirit. But when we think of daemon, we can think of any energy body, any kind of spirit that is divine, as being a daemon or a demon. So we're looking at gods, we're looking at goddesses, we're looking at nature spirits. And when I say gods and goddesses, I'm also going into what people now refer to as the demons. They call them the lower spirits, but they're not the lower spirits. I mean, if you look at some of the spirits from the Goetia, Baal, Belial, Astaroth, these were ancient gods and goddesses that were worshipped thousands of years ago. And they were possibly around before humans were even here. So they are definitely not lower spirits. When we speak of lower spirits, we are speaking more of spirits which are on the astral plane that would attach themselves to you in order to drain energy. And these aren't worshipped at all. They're not considered gods or goddesses, or even, I would suggest, not even demons. They're just lower spirits. But when we talk about spirits such as in the Goetia, or in demonolatry, if we look at the Decante demons, for instance, Lucifer, Satan. Satan and Lucifer themselves, create a whole discussion around them, because whereas one person might consider them to be a separate entity, another person would consider them to just be an archetype of a collective, or more of a collective than an archetype, but a collective of a particular type of god. Lucifer, for instance, is the light bringer, or the light bearer. And if you looked in different traditions, you've got your light bringer or your light bearer within each tradition. I mean, you can go to Lu within the Welsh pantheon. So they all have their light bringer or light bearer. They also have their own Satan, which would be the adversary. But you can work with Lucifer, and you can work with Satan as more of a collective. Even if you look into Wicca, believes in a god and goddess, or the Lord and the Lady, and it's more of a collective, noun, I suppose. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into that. It's drawing away from the star ruby itself. So we go through the four intelligences, or the four supernal forces, and we have the emotion, the initiation, and then the binding together, and then we come into the daemon, which would be the divine intelligence. Then the ritual itself just concludes with the cross Kabbalistic. Now, as I mentioned previously in the LBRP video, what you can do is do the Kabbalistic cross, or cross Kabbalistic in this case, as Crowley called it, and then do the banishing ritual, then do your work. Do any other rituals you want to, like an invoking ritual of the hexagram and middle pillar, whatever it may be. Then do your actual work, and then close with the cross Kabbalistic, and just make that the ending, the closing. Okay, now I want to get on to the singing of Eopan. I'm not sure if a lot of people gloss over this this aspect, because it's quite powerful, it's quite potent, and there's a lot of symbolism that comes into this. Now, I did note in the book, as I was reading through this chapter, just to refresh myself, that that what I actually outlined with the singing of Eopan isn't found in any other book. It's quite possible it is. When I wrote this, and I must say I haven't read anything in other books that relate to the same thing since then. I mean, I wrote this 2011, I think, so it was probably 8-9 years ago when I wrote this. It was just aspects of things that I found that related and bridged between different traditions, and it's quite interesting. I like bridging between different traditions and trying to find the similarities, because there are a lot of similarities. We often say that this path is wrong and this path is right, and a load of bullshit. They're all right and they're all wrong. But there are a lot of aspects within each tradition that almost form like a big jigsaw puzzle, and each tradition has their own little pieces to put in the big jigsaw puzzle. But there are overlaps and similarities, and we might use different terminology or different words to explain them, or to name them, or to title them. But when you really look at look at the practices themselves and the philosophy behind it, then you do start to see the similarities and the overlaps. So in regards to singing of Eopan, we start with the formula of E-A-O, or I, spelled I-A-O. Now when we look at the positions of these vowels, these notes within the body, we have the chakra system. Everybody knows about the chakra system. But from old Celtic traditions and heathen traditions, we also find the three cauldrons. These are the cauldrons of wisdom, motion, and incubation. And wisdom is found in the brow, motion is found in the heart, and incubation is found in the solar plexus. Now we think of the solar, when we talk about the solar plexus, it's here just below the rib cage. What we can do is bring that down into the will center, and the will center, if you're familiar with Chinese traditions and Tao practices, we get the dandian, which is just below the belly button, about 2 inches in, and that's it's kind of like the point where energy enters the body, leaves the body. It's just the interaction of the energy within the body to the energy without the body. So it's that connection with everything else. So we become part of everything. The energy that flows in and out of ourselves becomes everything else, and we become one. I actually hate using that term. We become one with everything, because it sounds very new agey, but it is. We are one with everything. I'm one with this desk, with this computer screen, with this camera, with everything that's in this room, with everything that's outside this room. The energy just flows around and in everything, and it's the same energy that flows through everything and within my body and your body. So because it's the same energy, we're all connected. Everything's connected. Well, that's the dandian point anyway. But that's the cauldron of incubation. So what happens in the Celtic practice is that, and I'll get more into this later as well, because it's become very important in my own practice at the moment. I've got a lot of things developing concerning circle casting and the placement of the elements within the circle and how they relate to the body, and how they spiral through the body, and there's a whole system that's starting to develop, which I'll obviously get into much later, because it's still in the process. But with the practice itself, the cauldron of incubation, you draw energy into the body from earth and from around you, and then as the cauldron fills up, each of the cauldrons are facing down, and then the cauldron starts to fill up, and as it fills up, it tips over, so it tips up, and as it tips up, it overflows, and the energy starts to move to the next cauldron, which is in the heart, which is the cauldron of motion, and that one starts to fill up, and as it fills up, it tips over and faces upwards, and then it overflows, and it overflows into the brow, which is the cauldron of wisdom, and that one again fills up, tips over, overflows, and then the energy goes into the heavens, into the higher realms. Now, when we go back into Kabbalistic practices, that what I was taught about the positions in the body and the vowels, we have E, E, A in the heart, O in the solar plexus, and U in the genital area, in the sacral. So if we take the formula of E, A, O, then we have E in the brow, A in the heart, O in the solar plexus, which then relates to the three cauldrons. And when we relate E, A, O back to their aspects, we have E, which is the mother, in the brow, O, which is the father, in the solar plexus, and then A, which is the child, in the heart. So there's a process of the mother and the father bringing about the birth of the child. Why? I mean, why would this be? It's, you know, it seems like a simple explanation. If we think of the position in the brow, which is E, it's not the letter E, it's the letter I, and the letter I, as if you may recall when we started this discussion on Star Ruby, I is the phallus, it's the penis, the lingam, and because I relates to the mother Isis, then we have that aspect, that union of masculine and feminine again. So we have the phallus and the mother, so we have that union. Then we go into the father, which is Osiris, or Osiris. And this is the O position, which is the O. So that would be the yoni, the vagina. And it's relating to the father, so again, we have the union of the masculine and feminine. And then we have the birth of the child in the heart. And the heart position is the position of Tiferet. And Tiferet is where we find the Holy Guardian Angel. If you go into things like traditional witchcraft, for instance, if we go into traditional witchcraft, then we may talk about the fetch beast. The fetch is the spiritual aspect of ourselves, which ventures into the underworld. And we have different aspects of the fetch. We have the fetch beast, which is the animal that we ride into the underworld. So it's sort of like our animal aspect, our animal self. And then we have the fetch mate, which is the fairy, which is the opposite part of our soul, which then goes into a whole discussion about Adam, Kadmon, and the splitting of the soul into two. And we can go into Greek mythology there, with Zeus splitting humans into, used to be androgynous beings, and then he split us into two, and therefore we have masculine and feminine, and we are separated from the other half of our soul, etc., etc., etc. That's a whole another discussion. So there's a lot of symbolism and mythology within this discussion that could go on and on for days. Now where was I? Okay, so with this union of masculine and feminine that's happening, again we find the as above so below, as below so above aspect, bringing Keter into Malkut and Malkut into Keter. So we have the birth of the child. It's not the son in this aspect. So we can actually bring in the four aspects that we have in the actual banishing ritual. So we have the mother and the father combination, and the son and the daughter combination. So it becomes the relationship of the mother-father or daughter-son, then giving birth to the child, and the child is Pan in its divine child aspect of Dionysius, and therefore we sing Pan as an R. So we have E or R, or E or Pan, and that's where the singing of Eo Pan becomes quite powerful. So we don't just sing Eo Pan. I mean, there's a whole aspect of it, of the union of masculine and feminine, the birth of the child as the divine child in Tiferet. So there's a lot more to it than just, making a nice sound. Now, if you want to actually go even further, you can obviously relate the chakras, brow, heart, and solar plexus, and you can bring in colors if you want to. Each chakra has its own color aspect. Then we can also relate it to actual musical notes. But when when you're singing, what you find is that you have a pitch for each position. Now E is usually quite high pitched, so you start quite high and then you bring it down a pitch to the throat, and then you bring it down a pitch to the heart, and down a pitch to the solar plexus, down a pitch to the sacral. So you start high and it comes down low. So you would have a E, and then you would come down to a ooh. So anyway, so we have, as I say, the different notes, and find your own pitch to these notes. But if you want to relate it back to musical notes, if you're more musically inclined, then you would have the note B in the head, F in the heart, and D in the solar plexus. And that concludes the entire discussion of the star ruby. I think you can tell from this discussion there is a lot of symbolism in this one simple ritual that you can obviously move forward with, go further with, and especially with just the singing of Iopan. I like to do the singing of Iopan. It's actually become part of my, well, practically every practice really. I've spoken about the 4 adorations, the 4 demonic adorations that I've started doing, and with each position of the sun and each demonic force, elemental force that I call, then I always end with the singing of Iopan. You know, when I do my circle casting, my banishing rituals, I always incorporate Iopan. It's just become part of my practice. And I think the main reason for that is because of its significance with the union of masculine and feminine. And it's not just the union of masculine and feminine. If we look at the hexagram, you know, the hexagram is the 2 triangles, one facing up, one facing down. And that also brings in the union of opposites. So it's the union of masculine and feminine, it's the union of mankind and God. So it is the union of above, below, Keta, Malkut, all of these things, all of these aspects, all of these opposites energies, and bringing them into union and bringing them into synchronicity. And then obviously the birth of the child, relating to the divine child, moving into the holy guardian angel, and Tiferet being in the middle of the tree of life. So we have Keta into Malkut, Malkut into Keta, and between is Tiferet, the divine child. So a lot of symbolism, a lot of aspects here that you can work with and work around, and bring into your own practice. And that's really it for the Star Ruby. So if you got any value out of this video or any other videos, please hit the like button, share, subscribe, and if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll address all of the questions that you have. And that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.